The stage was set, and the wintry Russian landscapes awaited the arrival of almost 4 million Axis soldiers, 600,000 motor vehicles, and over 600,000 horses marching towards Moscow. The Soviets were utterly unprepared for what would become the largest invasion in warfare history. As the curtains drew open for the Eastern Theater of World War II, the Soviets would be shoved back to the very gates of Moscow. Still, in an unexpected plot twist, the colossal invasion would be halted by the cold winter months, Germany's shattered supply lines, and the sheer determination of the Soviet troops. Outside of the Soviet capital, the drama would unfold before the sound of a dreadful orchestra like the world had never heard or seen. It was the so-called Stalin's organ, a massive rocket artillery system that launched dozens of rockets in a brief time, raining destruction upon vast areas. The weapon emitted imposing howling sounds as it fired, scaring the enemy to its core and even sending soldiers running in a panic as they heard the ominous lament spreading through the frozen Russian wastelands, proving a decisive factor in the outcome of the war. Making do. Joseph Stalin had vehemently refused to believe reports that Germany was preparing an invasion of Soviet territory, even as the Kremlin had known as far back as 1935 that the Nazis were planning an attack. After signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact in August of 1939, Stalin was confident that Hitler would not dare invade and open a new front of the war. Soviet intelligence warned him 47 times of the exact date of the invasion, but the Soviet leaders still refused to take any meaningful action. Then, on June 22, 1941, the Wehrmacht pierced the Soviet borders, and the defending troops had no way to stop the relentless German onslaught. The invaders swiftly took extensive territories from the Soviets, who struggled at every point to slow down the advance. Desperate to avoid losing Moscow, Stalin had to hastily bolster his military industry, prioritizing numbers and firepower over quality or innovation. The Katyusha rocket launcher, which would later be dubbed Stalin's organ by the German troops, was one such solution. Stalin's organ. The concept was straightforward, and it did not involve engineering innovation or complex technology. The design consisted of racks of parallel rails on which a series of warheads were mounted, with a folding structure to lift the rails into launch position. The racks were fitted into military trucks, tanks, and even towed vehicles, with the most common iteration being the truck-mounted Katyusha. Each truck had from 14 to 48 launchers, depending on the type of rocket being propelled, and the calibers of the projectiles ranged from 88mm to 300mm. The M13 rocket of the BM13, one of the most widely used versions of the weapon, was 80 centimeters long, 13.2 centimeters in diameter, and weighed 42 kilograms. The rocket system was drastically less accurate than other artillery solutions, and reloading procedures were longer and more complex. However, it made up for its shortcomings with extremely effective saturation bombardment and the morale-decreasing effect on enemy troops. In addition, a battery of 4 BM-13 launchers could fire a salvo in less than 10 seconds, delivering 4.35 tons of explosives over a 4.3 million square foot impact area, making its power comparable to that of 72 conventional artillery guns at the time. Meanwhile, a battery of BM-13-16 launchers consisted of 4 firing trucks, 2 reload vehicles, and 2 support trucks, and each firing vehicle had a crew of 6. Reloading was executed in 3 to 4 minutes. Although immediate reloading was discouraged, the standard procedure was to move to a new position some 10 kilometers away due to the ease with which the battery could be identified by the enemy. Consequently, 3 batteries were combined into a company, and 3 companies into a separate mine-firing rocket artillery regiment. Mobility was also a significant advantage for the Stalin's organ. In the hands of a skilled crew, the launchers could move to a new location immediately after firing their barrage, denying the enemy the opportunity to strike the Katyusha at its last known location. But above all other features, the Katyusha's most significant advantage for the Soviet Union was its cost. It was very cheap to produce, and it could be swiftly mounted on almost any vehicle, providing an artillery solution with the bonus of creating a demoralizing effect on the enemy troops. Due to the ease of manufacture and the weapon's psychological effect on enemy forces, Stalin's organs batteries were frequently massed in vast numbers to create a shock effect on enemy forces. An imposing weapon. Even before the accuracy problems of the Katyusha became painfully apparent on the battlefield, Soviet strategies had successfully predicted that the impressive firing spectacle of the rocket launcher system would influence the enemy's psychological perception. Due to this perceived advantage, the nature of the weapon was concealed even for the crews that were meant to operate it. They were called by nicknames such as Kostakov guns, after Andrei Kostakov, the head of the Reaction Engine Scientific Research Institute, and finally classed as Guards mortars. The name BM-13 was only allowed into secret documents in 1942 and remained classified until after the war. The secrecy surrounding the weapon meant that during its debut in July of 1941, the imposing effect it delivered struck Soviet forces as well as German troops. Then, as the weapon was unleashed for the first time across the Eastern Front, Soviet soldiers were reported to have run towards the forest in a panic after hearing the battery's ominous sound. A German veteran would later describe it as, quote, vile, if you can put it that way, because it could fire off a huge number of rockets. On top of that, there was the unpleasant howling, and it covered a wide area. In the winter outside Moscow, it made the life of the frontline soldier hell. The rocket launching system's shock value was mainly due to its mechanism. The weapon fired numerous rockets almost simultaneously, and the long trails left by the flying missiles on top of the nightmarish sounds they produced made for a highly overwhelming atmosphere. Katyusha. In one of Germany's first encounters against the theatrical weapon near Smolensk on July 14, 1941, a mere 7 experimental launchers decimated a German infantry formation in the town of Rudnya. The barrage struck with such power and speed while emitting its dreadful wails that the German troops broke and fled from the city. The demonstration was convincing enough to persuade Stalin that the rockets could be a game-changer, and thus production was significantly increased. Some months later, over 520 Katyushka batteries were in the field, making them a ubiquitous sight for German soldiers trying to invade the Soviet Union. Russian soldiers didn't have an official name for the weapon, as this was protected under the top-secret classification the rocket launcher had. Thus, the Soviets had to come up with their own name for the device. The original BM-13 launchers were manufactured at a plant known as the Voronezh Komintern, and they arrived at the front lines marked with a giant letter K. The frontline soldiers jokingly suggested that the K stood for Katyusha, or Katie, the name of a famous 1938 folk song about a young woman separated from her lover during wartime that contained wailing sounds that resembled the rockets. As time went on, however, the element of surprise waned, and the effect as a psychological weapon decreased. That's when its flaws and blatant inaccuracy became much more evident for the Germans and the Soviet High Command. Variants and operations. After its accomplishments in the first months of the war, mass production was ordered on the Katyusha, and the design of newer, more advanced models began. The Katyusha was cheap and easy to build. It could be manufactured in light industrial installations that did not have the specialized hardware to construct conventional artillery gun barrels, making its production a no-brainer for the desperate Soviets trying to contain the German advance. By 1942, 3,237 Katyusha launchers of all types had been built, and as the war ended, 10,000 units had been constructed. The most frequently used truck-mounted Katyushas were installed on ZiS-6 6x4 trucks, as well as the 2-axle ZiS-5 and the ZiS-5V vehicles. In 1941, a small number of BM-13s were fitted on STZ-5 artillery tractors. Still, the loss of mobility resulted in the Soviets not pursuing this solution. Interestingly, a few units were also mounted on VK-1K tanks, but the venture was deemed an unnecessary waste of heavy armor after testing. Starting in 1942, as the US and Britain could better supply the Soviet Union, the Katyushas were also mounted on various British, Canadian, and US trucks. One of the imported vehicles, the US-6 2.5-ton 6x6 truck, offered such remarkable cross-country performance that it quickly became the standard mounting for the Katyushas. More than 1,800 models using the American truck were deployed by the end of World War II. The 82mm BM-8 Katyusha was authorized in August of 1941 and deployed as the BM-836 on trucks, as well as on T-40 and T-60 light tanks. Months later, these were also installed on GAZ-67 Jeeps as the BM-88 and on the larger Studebaker trucks as the BM-848. Contradictory effect. As the war reached its final stage, German troops had become very familiar with all the variants of the Stalin organ. Despite its loud sound, seeming omnipresence, and tremendous firepower, they learned to consider the weapon a mild threat. Another German veteran would later write, quote, "The effect of the Stalin organ was contradictory. It had more of an effect on morale than an explosive effect, because the sheer number of rockets in the attack was demoralizing. For example, the rockets during the attack of the Donets River caused hardly any damage to the igloos constructed by our soldiers." German troops soon understood that the rockets were far less lethal than other types of artillery weapons, as in contrast to artillery shells, rockets exploded on impact, making it impossible for the projectile to penetrate the ground or ricochet off of it. This meant that the soldiers only needed to take cover, and the damage from the Katyusha would be considerably nullified. Despite its initial significance, by the end of the war, the weapon was only effective in particular scenarios where the rapid rate of fire could completely halt German attacks, providing the Soviets with a strategic advantage. A German officer later recounted that, quote, "The Stalin organ was without significance in winter of 41 and 42 during the battles outside Moscow and around Rzhev. It was only in 1943 and 44, during the combat operations around Orel and Kursk, and along the rest of the Central Front, that we found that the Stalin organ, with its rapid rate of fire, exhibited a major impact." Today. Despite the limited role of the weapon, the team of scientists who developed it, Leonid Schwartz, Moisey Komisarchik, and engineer Yakov Shor, received the Stalin Prize for their outstanding contribution to the defense of the motherland in 1942. The Stalin's organ would continue to be used far after the war's end, as the Red Army persisted in refining the concept well into the 1950s and 60s. The BM-21 Grad, or Heil, was one of the upgraded variants, and it could fire up to 40 128mm M21 warheads in less than 20 seconds. The improved launchers could also deliver high-explosive fragmentation rounds, anti-tank warheads, smoke bombs, cluster munitions, and even landmines. Katyusha systems were broadly used in the Chechen Wars, and Iraq launched Katyushas at American troops in the 2003 US-led Iraq invasion. Insurgents later deployed the same technology in attacks on the Coalition Provisional Authority in Baghdad's Green Zone. Several variants of the same technology continue to be used today, and it remains a cheap and efficient way of delivering significant firepower and shock value to enemy forces. Thank you for watching our video. Do you think the Stalin's organ is anything more than a show of force? Please share your thoughts in the comment section down below, and don't forget to subscribe to our Dark Documentaries channels for more exciting wartime stories. Stay tuned.